Hi, my name is Dr. K, and today I'm going to be presenting Quai Network. What is Quai Network? Quai Network is a scalable proof-of-work blockchain designed to serve as a global monetary system. With big claims, you need great individuals behind it to actually build and execute. We have individuals with backgrounds from Consensus, from Kraken, Circle, Fidelity, Deloitte, Ava, and we have a great set of advisors, including Stephen Wolfram, Dionysius Zendros from Stanford, Cesare Francesca from previously of Coinbase. So we have a great team building Quai Network. So fundamentally, with Quai Network, we want you to imagine a new world. We want you to imagine a world where a blockchain can do for value what TCP/IP did for information. A world where the majority of value circulates on a single blockchain, where financial instruments are natively constructed and transacted on this blockchain, and that everyday commerce and economic activity is on that chain, and that blockchain is open, accessible, incredibly neutral. To do this, we believe that you need an integrated blockchain that can remove the complexity of many systems, creating a homogeneous, scalable layer. We believe that this system needs a dollar equivalent natively within the system, and that it needs to be able to do at least 50,000 transactions per second. We also believe that this system must have a programmable monetary layer, and to be credibly neutral, it must be based off of proof of work. So let's talk about one of the big product market fits within crypto, which is the stablecoin market. More than 70% of all transactions by value currently on blockchains are happening in stable tokens. One of the major problems though with stable tokens is they are actually the Achilles heel of open decentralized systems, because they're dependent on centralized fiat custodians as well as issuers and intermediaries. We propose a novel stable token that we call Chi. We call Chi a decentralized energy dollar. And Chi is a stable token which is derived based off of the hash rate in the system, which is correlated to the electricity costs of miners. By having Chi linked to electricity costs, we can create a token that maintains roughly equivalent purchasing power over time, so it can act like a stable token that's completely endogenous to the blockchain itself. So it's a referential point that's stable, derived from information from proof-of-work mining. And we believe that this energy dollar can be a catalyst for growth. We already stated that 70% of transaction value is circulating in stables, but all of those stables aren't actually contributing direct value to the blockchains on which they run. If you look at Chi, every creation of Chi is actually value that's created and maintained in that blockchain system, and then it actually circulates. So we believe that having this energy dollar alternative can soak up some, if not a significant portion of stablecoin market share in the future. So great, we have an energy dollar. That energy dollar has cash-like privacy properties, but without a great network on which it can scale and have, sub 10-second transaction finalization, you don't really have anything. So what is Quai Network in terms of the blockchain? It is a new architecture, a new consensus mechanism, and it actually establishes a new paradigm from what can be done within decentralized blockchain systems. With this, we actually introduced the concept of sharding, subnetting, and we also have an EVM compatible token Quai that works on this network. And with this, we can do more than 50,000 transactions per second, again with sub 10-second finalization times, allowing this to actually function as a global money system. So we have this hierarchy of merge mine chains that allows us to create a fully parallelized set of shards and subnets that allows us to scale in a completely new direction than other scalable blockchains. If you look at current systems like Monad, for example, they are scaling in a vertical axis, which is they're trying to take a single blockchain or a single shard and push the throughput as high as possible through a single shard. What we have figured out how to do is actually have many shards in the system, so we have a completely new dimension by which we can scale the system. We are also doing everything that Monad is doing in a single shard, but instead of being, limited by 1,000 TPS in a single shard, once a single shard gets 1,000 TPS, our system dynamically adds new shards so that it can keep scaling with demand. So it's a completely novel dimension in scalability that no other blockchain has managed to unlock. One of the mechanisms by which we do that is our new consensus algorithm called Proof-of-Entropy-Minima, or POEM, which allows us to create a causally invariant consensus algorithm that allows us to accomplish this sharding. In terms of our go-to-market strategy, there are several categories where we have unique value propositions for individuals that have immediate needs. One of those great examples is a partners of ours called Rarible, and they are trying to bring Web3 into Web2 businesses. And their biggest problem is they cannot guarantee Web2 businesses stable low fees. And so if they go to a Web2 business and say, today your fees are going to be a penny, tomorrow they may be $100, it's very hard to sell into that business because you can't plan businesses when your costs vary by 1,000. So because our system can dynamically scale, we can sort of guarantee a penny today, a penny tomorrow, and a penny 10 years from now in terms of transaction fees. So Rarible is actually moving their Web2 business onto Quai once we launch. The other one really is that protocol native energy dollar or stable token. If you look at really two categories, you have an emerging market category where people are actually trying to use crypto to replace their hyperinflationary nation state currencies. A great example of this is Buenos Aires. Over 30% of people in Buenos Aires have tried to actually use crypto transactionally with both Binance Smart Chain and Tron. But as more people in Buenos Aires used it, the fees went up and it priced out daily commercial use. So they ended up stopping using those cryptos as transactionary mediums. But with Quai, because we can scale with demand, again, once they have penny transactions, as the system scales in demand, the system will also scale in supply and allow for greater throughput, guaranteeing that they'll continue to have penny transactions in the future. Another example is actually miners or entities that don't want to have token value risk. So a great example is if you have a miner, miners have the issue of having to hedge out risk because they're always natively long the tokens. But in this particular case, because you have Qi, which is connected to energy, they can actually decide to mine and take their profits in Qi, which eliminates their need to hypothecate instruments to hedge their long risk on a deflationary volatile token like Bitcoin. So anyone that's trying to operate within a blockchain system that's looking for stable or hedged risk, Qi is a native asset which they can use. And with that, just giving sort of a timeline of where we are and where we have been. This project actually started as a research project out of the University of Texas, and we had a National Science Foundation grant 6 years ago now. And we've been working on this full time since 2022, after we kind of did it as a research project. Our initial funders were Polychain Capital and Alumni Ventures, and we are in our fourth and final testnet. During this testnet, we have had over 2,200 nodes participate. We have demonstrated that in a worldwide network, we can do better than 7,000 TPS in only a 9-shard system. In this testnet, we had over 1.36 terahash. That's equivalent to miners spending $1.5 million per month mining our testnet tokens. We currently have almost 300,000 people following us on Twitter. We have almost 200,000 people as our community in Discord. In our testnets, we've done over 1 billion transactions. We have 61 projects building. And for reference, in that testnet, that makes us 70 times faster than Ethereum in only a 9-shard setting. We can go to a 255 shard setting, which gives us about 250,000 transactions per second, but we've demonstrated in our testnet 9 shards. So really, what is our value proposition? Building the first blockchain that is not technologically insufficient and can actually meet the demands of creating a global monetary system. And our final rollout and launch for mainnet is in January. So one approach is thinking about Bitcoin. Fundamentally, I don't think Bitcoin is an economically sustainable system. And the reason for that is as the inflation subsidies decrease, without increasing the transactions per second, you actually need to sort of precipitously increase the fees per transaction to maintain the same level of security over time. So Bitcoin's kind of in this conundrum in that it's created a store of value that nobody wants to spend. It also hasn't scaled to allow greater transaction throughput, but even if it could scale, because it's a store of value, nobody wants to spend it when there's sort of worse money that they could use as an alternative. So basically, our thesis is if you look at Quai, there's really 2 forms of money in the network. There's a superior form of money, which is the deflationary token Quai, and there's the sort of inferior form of money, which is the stable token Chi. The idea being is Quai encourages hoarding because it's a store of value and it's sort of designed like Bitcoin and its emissions properties. Whereas Chi is meant to sort of be a stable token or a slightly inflationary token, which encourages velocity in the system. It also has a different characteristic that it has privacy. So if I'm actually spending money or I'm a business that's wanting to take in money, having all of my activity on chain really isn't a feasible way in a competitive business to take in money, right? So if my customers started paying me in Ethereum and everybody can see the Ethereum transactions on the blockchain, every competitor knows what I'm doing, how much they're taking in, what I'm paying my suppliers, they can track my whole business. But with Chi, because it has cash-like properties, you can't tell really where it's going unless you sort of reveal your keys to an auditor. So from a public perspective, it's cash-like properties. So it's stable, you can price goods and services in it, and it also has cash-like properties, and it's slightly inflationary, so it encourages velocity. So really what you're answering is the conundrum of how do you create an economically sustainable proof-of-work system, which is you actually need 2 forms of money, a superior form that acts as a store of value, and an inferior form that acts as a unit of account, medium of exchange, and encourages velocity. And with that, you generate transaction fees. The transaction fees over time in a scalable system are enough to offset any inflation subsidies. So you can have a deflationary setup for the store of value. And over time, the fees for security come from the velocity of the money. Seed round was 10 million, and that was from Polychain and alumni. And then we did a strategic round that we raised 5 million from about 10 investors. So currently we have an open round, which is still part of that strategic round with DNA. We have an SPV. It's on the same terms as that strategic round, which is a 300 million Genesis block valuation at 10 cents a token. So the short answer is no, the token is not trading now, but in our testnet, we set it up as an economic testnet, meaning the tokens in this testnet will convert pro rata to a number of mainnet tokens. So that's roughly at a 5-to-1 ratio, and people have figured out how to trade the token in testnet. And those traded values are anywhere between 8 and 9 cents. But that's a 5-to-1 then to mainnet. So that means the tokens, roughly speaking, are trading somewhere between 40 and 45 cents right now, mainnet equivalent in testnet. When is our projected TGE date? Right now, we are planning somewhere between Jan 7 and Jan 21 of next year. So it's getting tight enough that I'm telling you dates, not months. Yeah. Well, Stephen Wolfram is very interesting because when we talk about blockchains and blockchain technologies, we've really taken a fundamentally different approach here, and that I'm an engineer and physicist as a background. So I didn't sort of design this as a software developer. I designed this as an engineer. And the interesting thing is the system that we ended up developing that can scale and shard is actually what we would call a causally invariant multi-way graph. And the interesting thing is Stephen Wolfram's fundamental theory of physics, which he has proposed, is a causally invariant multi-way graph. So Quai Network is actually almost a perfect analog in a macro setting of his fundamental theory of physics. So the interesting thing, right, is we did a 5-hour podcast with him, and like we went from sort of like 0 to 1, going through what is POEM, what is Proof-of-Entropy-Minima, how does this relate to physics, how does this relate to thermoeconomics. So one of the things that Stephen is also interested in is not just, you know, sort of the fundamental nature of physics, but these things actually have analogs to economies. So there's sort of this emergent field of economics, which is based off thermodynamics. And if you look at what we're doing with proof of work, we're actually connecting the thermodynamic understanding of entropy to the information theory understanding of entropy. So like the Gibbs idea of entropy to the Shannon idea of entropy, and we're doing that through proof of work. But what that does is it actually makes it so that we're tying the economics of this system back to the real world through proof of work. But in doing that, you're also potentially creating a brand new field of physics and economics, where economics is based off physics. So that's like the other reason he's super interested in. And we're gonna do a follow-up podcast in January where like we go through the economic aspects a little bit more. If you think about money, the reason gold was interesting and is interesting as an asset is because it is effectively the Neanderthal version of proof of work. The reason gold has value is because it was roughly evenly distributed through the Earth's crust, such that if you mined an ounce of gold and refined it, that ounce of gold was a representation of the work that you disposed to mine that gold. So it had scarcity relative to the amount of imputed effort. So it's a representation of previously expended energy, right? So like that is why gold is an interesting asset. If we look at proof of work and we look at chi, it's doing the same thing but in digital form. So I'm saying I can issue a token which is proportional to the amount of work that you put into making that token. It has the exact same characteristic as gold, but it sits in the digital format. So instead of having the issue of how do I store gold, how do I transport gold, which then sort of leads to the downfall of gold, because in storing and transferring to make it easy, we have trusted intermediaries in which we have sort of receipts that we circulate, those being gold-backed dollars or those being ETF notes, right? And then ultimately the people that hold the gold want to fractionally reserve and over-allocate that multiple times because we can't easily and digitally trade it. So imagine if you had gold, but that gold was easily digitally tradable. That is the system we have constructed, and that's why it's so interesting, particularly for someone like Stephen Wolfram, because like once you do that in a digital format, you literally have like a new backbone, a new primitive, a new physical economic construct that like allows you to develop thermoeconomics. The way that she works is there's sort of two mechanisms in the system. One mechanism we have is that chi is emitted proportional to hash. So if you mine a block and you put like a certain number of hashes in, you'll get that amount of chi out. The other piece in the system is that we have an exchange rate that's in the system where people can convert Quai to chi or chi to Quai. And the way that we set that exchange rate is we set it so that the market is neutral to the offer. And if the market is neutral to the offer, it means that the internal exchange rate matches the external exchange rate. And what this does is it allows the supply of chi to expand and contract based off demand. So if demand goes up, it's an inflationary token in that the total supply is increasing, right? But its value is staying constant because the market is optimally making money if the chi token matches the cost of production. So if its market price matches the production cost, that's like the equilibrium optimality. But what it does is it allows the supply of chi to expand and contract. Well, so what'll happen is that the cost of production is still the same because it is the cost of production of a hash. So people will stop producing it, and people in the market, because the market price is now below the cost of production, they would actually buy it up and convert it into Quai. So both Quai and chi sort of have counter stabilizing pair. but Quai is very much the volatile pair. So like it has the ability to like go up precipitously and down, much like Bitcoin, whereas Qi is really meant to be more like the dollar. But in this system, instead of the dollar being an external quantity where value flows in and out of the system back to the dollar, all of the value, once it enters the system, can circulate internally. So there's actually a pretty cool like implication of that, which is, let's say that people start to understand that Qi is a good stable token alternative. One of the characteristics that's nice about it is that it is cash-like and it is non-intermediated. So there are several reasons that people might prefer a non-intermediated cash-like conversion into a stable versus going onto an exchange and selling for dollars. So if we take in any sort of sizable percentage of the stable demand when this market decides to sort of go risk off, that means that the Qi supply would actually have to potentially precipitously increase in amount. And every time a new Qi is created, it looks like buying Quai in volume of 1 Qi. So if there is like $1 billion demanded in Qi, that will look like $1 billion demand of buying Quai. If the value of Quai started dropping, the implication would be that people would want to go to Qi or they would exit. So there's another sort of parameter in the system, which is hash rate. So in the system, if let's say there's a total exogenous shock to the confidence in the system, that is made up through the change in hash rate. So if we're at like a very high hash rate and then people decide that, you know, there's a loss of confidence of some sort, the way the system re-equilibrates is by hash rate dropping. So, and in this system, there's no peg, right? We didn't like peg Qi to a kilowatt hour. We just create a reference point which market participants are incentivized to approach. So anytime the system is shocked, you might get some slight amount of perturbations away from that equilibrium point, but over time, no matter what the shock is, they always want to re-achieve equilibrium. So there's stability in the fact that there is no peg. So the hash rate dropping, you know, up into the point that like complete future confidence is lost is actually creating discount opportunities for the miners, which then incentivizes them to come back in and actually sort of arrest any sort of drop in hash rate. So this is actually a great question. So the Quai token is actually emitted proportional to the log of hash. And because of the nature of a log function, as the hash rate drops, the sort of price you're paying for Quai per hash is also dropping, but like with a square of the proportionality, right? So if the sort of hash rate goes in half, you're going to be getting roughly the same amount of Quai per block, but you're going to be doing it at half the input cost. So it's effectively doubling in price, a little bit more than doubling in price. But because of that sort of logarithmic term in the system, your cost, there's an arresting property in the system. So if the hash rate wants to drop, unless you're also like similarly getting proportional price delta, there's an incentive to come back in and mine. So it's sort of like a self-stabilizing hash rate property, which is actually better than any sort of deterministic time-based emissions policy. So if you look at Bitcoin, a lot of Bitcoin's price actually has to do with an imbalance in stock to flow, which is based off the halvening periods. And that's why you see these like precipitous runoffs and these precipitous fall off is because of that imbalance, which creates sort of market manias. But with this system, because the hash or the emissions is always actively adjusting to the hash rate, you should actually see like more stable increases, which we think having stable sort of growth will grow faster than having sort of manic growth. So how do we get people to build on top of Quai Network? So the Quai token itself is an EVM compatible token and it's deflationary. The way that we get people to build is we target the subset of users that have a problem that we can uniquely address. Examples of that, again, being Rarible, who are trying to bring Web3 into Web2 and have a need for long-term fixed predictable transaction costs. as well as people that are looking for non-US denominated stable tokens. So there are a subset of users who we can answer a problem that nobody else can answer for them today, and that is how we're going to get a foothold in the market. There's a foundation that's set up in the Caymans, and the foundation's purpose is to have tokens to allocate over time to incentivize building on top of Quai. And you're right about the etymology of the word. So Quai, I'm actually a fluent Mandarin speaker. Quai in Mandarin is either means fast or it's actually like dollar. So in some ways it's like fast dollar. And then chi means energy, just like you said. So one of the things that we're really trying to do with Quai is we believe that if we can tie economics back to physics, specifically energetic thermodynamics, that we can create a money system that is efficient and unmolested of politics. And if we have a system that represents real economic activity purely rather than political activity and maneuvering and manipulation, we can actually create a much more efficient and vibrant society. I think the right word here would be pure laissez-faire capitalism would be sort of the right definition. If you look at capitalism, I don't think, certainly in our modern society, we've ever experienced capitalism. I think we use that as a marketing term, but I've actually spent a significant amount of time in China. And in many ways, I think the Chinese are potentially more capitalistic than America in terms of actually how their market's set up and function, right? We say we're capitalist here, but we pay 40% of our tax to government, and we have, volumes of regulations that make it hard to openly compete economically. So that isn't a capitalistic system. The more you regulate, the more you tax, that becomes more socialistic. So I would argue right now in America, we're probably more of a socialist system, even though we market it as a capitalist democracy. I got into Bitcoin because it had these very interesting libertarian properties. I think over time, there was this promise that Bitcoin could sort of fix its technological insufficiencies so that it could actually fulfill the idea of digital cash. But over time, it proved that it couldn't do that for one reason or another. So I don't think it's a sustainable system. I don't think it's a private system. I don't think it's a scalable system. So I don't think it can actually be digital cash. But most importantly, the real promise of it was being able to separate money from the state. That was like its promise. That's what got me into Bitcoin. That's what the original sort of cypherpunk movement was. But because it isn't private, because it isn't scalable, because it can't be used by cash, it can never, unless it somehow obtains those properties, can separate money from the state. So everything about Quai that we've done as a design process of trying to figure out how to separate the money from the state. So when I look at the system and I look at the design criteria, I am thinking of the US as the nation state actor against which I am building the system. 100%. So I'm looking at how much security I have, how do I make it useful, how do I make it resilient? One of the things that you need in addition to economic resilience within the consensus mechanism, proof of work, you need social resilience. How do you actually get social resilience in a system? If I have Bitcoin and I just have a few million tech bros that are hodling Bitcoin, as a politician, I can come in and I will only upset a few million speculators. But if I create a cash-like system that people are using to buy their groceries and fill up their gas tank, and now I want to do some sort of regulatory thing to cut off that system, you're screwed as a politician. That's suicide, right? You take away people's ability to live and transact, the people will riot and rebel. So it creates social resilience if it can be used by more people more of the time for more transactions. And if you do that, that is how you're going to create a sufficiently resilient system to prevent governments from fighting it. And that is how you separate money from the state.